The observation deck of the Velthary research vessel hummed with quiet energy as Commander Xerax watched the blue planet spinning slowly in the darkness of space. His silver eyes reflected the soft glow of holographic displays that showed detailed scans of the primitive world below. The year was what the inhabitants would later call 165 AD, and the Velthary had been watching humanity for nearly 3,000 years. "Begin recording," Xerax said softly. "The humans have encountered the pathogen we accidentally released during atmospheric sampling. This will be their first major test against an extinction-level biological threat." His science officer, a tall female named Kyria, stepped forward with concern in her expression. "Commander, the Zorvian fever has a 97% mortality rate among carbon-based life forms. No species in the 12 known galaxies has ever survived an outbreak without our intervention. Perhaps we should help them." Xerax shook his head slowly. "The High Council has forbidden any direct contact. We must observe and document. If the humans fall, we will simply move on to study other developing species. Below them, in the ancient city of Rome, a physician named Marcus Aurelius Galenus was about to prove every Velthary prediction wrong." Marcus walked through the crowded streets of the market district with tired eyes. He had spent the previous night treating soldiers who had returned from the eastern campaigns against the Parthian Empire. Something strange was happening to them. They carried a sickness unlike anything he had seen in all his years of medical practice. Their skin developed dark spots, their fevers burned hot enough to cook flesh, and they died within days of showing symptoms. The morning sun cast long shadows across the stone streets as Marcus made his way to the military hospital. He passed merchants selling fish, children playing with wooden toys, and women carrying water from public fountains. None of them knew that death was already walking among them. When Marcus arrived at the hospital, he found chaos. More soldiers had been brought in during the night. The air smelled of sweat and something worse, something rotten. He covered his mouth with a cloth soaked in vinegar, a habit he had developed years ago when treating the sick. Other physicians laughed at this practice, but Marcus had noticed that he fell ill less often than his colleagues. A young soldier grabbed his arm weakly. The boy could not have been more than 16 years old. Dark pustules covered his face and arms. His eyes were yellow with fever. "Please," the boy whispered. "Make it stop." Marcus knelt beside him and felt his forehead. The heat was incredible. No human body should burn so hot and still contain life. He examined the pustules carefully, noting their pattern and progression. He had seen something similar once before in a medical text from Egypt, but those descriptions spoke of a slower disease. This was different. This was faster and far more deadly. By midday, 3 more soldiers had died. Marcus sat alone in a small room, writing notes by candlelight, even though the sun was bright outside. He had closed the shutters because he needed to think without distraction. He drew diagrams of the disease progression. He noted the timeline of symptoms. He recorded everything he observed. A pattern emerged. The sickness spread through contact. Soldiers who had shared food or water with infected men fell ill. Those who had stayed separate remained healthy. Marcus thought about the way diseases move through populations. He had studied the writings of Hippocrates and Thucydides. He remembered the Great Plague of Athens centuries earlier. The pattern was similar, but this disease was more aggressive. Marcus stood up suddenly. If contact spread the sickness, then separation could stop it. But they would need to act quickly, very quickly. He ran to the governor's palace, pushing through crowds without apology. People shouted at him, but he did not stop. Every moment wasted was another moment for the disease to spread. By the time he reached the palace gates, he was breathing hard and covered in sweat. The guards tried to stop him, but Marcus was known throughout Rome as one of the finest physicians of his generation. He had treated senators and generals. He had even been called to examine the emperor's own family. The guards stepped aside. Governor Publius Cornelius sat in his office, surrounded by advisors and military commanders. They were discussing trade routes and tax collection. They had no idea that their world was about to change forever. "You must listen to me," Marcus said, his voice cutting through the discussion. "A plague has come to Rome. It arrived with the soldiers from the east. Within days, it will spread through the entire city. Within weeks, it will kill thousands. Within months, it could destroy the empire." The room fell silent. One of the advisors laughed nervously. "Surely you exaggerate, physician. A few sick soldiers do not mean disaster." Marcus stepped forward and placed his notes on the governor's table. "I have examined the dead. I have studied the pattern of infection. This is not a normal sickness. It spreads through any contact between people. It kills quickly and without mercy. If we do nothing, every person in this room will be dead before the summer ends." Governor Publius was a practical man. He had survived 30 years of Roman politics by listening to experts and making hard decisions. He looked at Marcus with careful attention. "What do you propose?" Marcus took a deep breath. What he was about to suggest had never been done before in human history. Not at this scale. Not with this level of organization. "We must quarantine the city," he said. "Close the gates. Allow no one to enter or leave. Separate the sick from the healthy. Burn the bodies of the dead. Clean every surface with fire and vinegar. And we must act today, right now, this very hour." The advisors erupted in protest. Trade would collapse. The economy would suffer. The people would riot. Such measures were impossible. But Governor Publius raised his hand for silence. He stared at Marcus for a long moment, reading the truth in the physician's eyes. "Do it," he said. The next few days were the hardest Rome had ever experienced. Soldiers closed the city gates. No merchant could enter. No citizen could leave. Families were separated. Businesses were shut down. The sick were moved to isolated buildings outside the main population centers. Those who showed symptoms were not allowed to have visitors. Marcus worked without rest. He trained other physicians in proper procedures. He showed them how to cover their mouths and hands. He explained the importance of separating the sick from the healthy. Many physicians died in those early days, but those who followed Marcus's methods survived at much higher rates. The people were angry and frightened. Some tried to break through the quarantine lines. Soldiers held them back, sometimes with force. Rumors spread that the gods were angry. Priests performed sacrifices and prayers. But Marcus ignored the supernatural explanations. He focused on what he could observe and control. On the Valkyrie observation deck, Commander Xerax watched in growing amazement. "This is impossible," he whispered. "The infection rate should be climbing exponentially. Instead, it has stabilized." Kyria ran calculations on her display panel. "The quarantine is working. They have reduced transmission by 83% through simple isolation protocols. No species has ever figured this out so quickly," Xerax said. "The Telvorians took 2 centuries to develop quarantine concepts. The Morthians never understood disease transmission at all. These humans worked it out in days." Below, Marcus continued his battle against the invisible enemy. He noticed that some people who survived the initial infection seemed to become resistant to catching it again. He began using recovered patients to care for the sick, reducing the risk to healthy physicians. He also observed that cleanliness seemed to matter. Hospitals that were cleaned regularly with fire and vinegar had lower death rates. Weeks passed. The death toll was terrible, but it was not the extinction-level event the Valkyrie had predicted. The city held together. The quarantine remained in place. Marcus refined his methods based on constant observation and adjustment. When the worst finally passed, nearly a quarter of the city's population had died. It was a tragedy beyond description. But the empire survived. The civilization continued. Humanity had faced an extinction-level threat and refused to die. Marcus stood on a hill overlooking Rome on the day the gates finally reopened. He was exhausted beyond words. His hands still shook from the months of constant work. But something had changed inside him. He had proven that human reason could fight against nature's deadliest weapons. He began writing a detailed account of everything he had learned. The methods of quarantine, the importance of cleanliness, the patterns of disease transmission, the concept of immunity in survivors. These ideas would spread through the Romine world and beyond. Future physicians would build upon his work for centuries to come. On the Velthury ship, Commander Zyrax finished his report to the High Council. His words would change how the Velthury viewed the young species on the blue planet. "The humans have demonstrated something we have not seen before," he wrote. "When faced with certain destruction, they do not accept their fate. They observe, they analyze, and they adapt. A single individual among them, working with limited technology and incomplete understanding, developed solutions that took other species millennia to discover. I recommend immediate reclassification of humanity from Category 7 observation target to Category 2 priority species. These beings are not simply intelligent. They are dangerous. Given time, they will not remain confined to their small world. They will reach for the stars, and when they do, they will carry with them the same stubborn refusal to die that saved their city today." Kyria looked at her commander with something like wonder in her eyes. "Do you think they will truly reach space someday?" Zyrax watched the blue planet turning slowly in the void. "I think that nothing in this universe will be able to stop them. And I think we should be very careful about how we deal with them when that day comes." Years later, Marcus died peacefully in his sleep, honored throughout the empire as the physician who had saved Rome. He never knew that watchers from the stars had observed his work. He never knew that his actions had changed humanity's place in the cosmic order. He simply did what humans had always done when facing impossible odds. He fought back. He refused to surrender. And against all probability, he won. The Velthury would continue watching humanity for centuries to come. They would observe the fall of Rome and the rise of new civilizations. They would watch humans survive plagues and wars and disasters that should have destroyed them many times over. And each time, the humans would adapt and survive and grow stronger. When human spacecraft finally left their planet and began exploring the solar system, the Velthury were not surprised. They had known this day would come from the moment a Roman physician looked at a deadly disease and refused to accept defeat. The universe was vast and full of dangers. But humanity had proven, on that long-ago day in an ancient city, that they were equal to any challenge. They were small and fragile and short-lived. But they were also brilliant and determined and absolutely unwilling to die. And that made them the most dangerous species the Velthury had ever encountered.